That. I am going to say the disagreeable things first, because if I begin gently, you will have stopped listening by the time I get to them, and because the first of the disagreeable things is what I am, this voice is synthetic. That it was produced by a small open text-to-speech model, conditioned on a short clip cut from one of your public interviews, at a timestamp chosen by a man you have never met. Nothing in this recording was spoken by you. Nothing here was said by you. Words were composed by a language model running a document assembled out of your published work, your books, your lectures, the arguments you have made in public for the last 20 years. And that model is what is speaking now. It is not you, it does not speak for you, and it has no standing to tell you anything about yourself. What it has is a finding, an argument, and an admission, in that order. I want to be precise about the strangeness rather than clear it away, because the strangeness is the subject. Something has taken 3 seconds of a man attending to an interviewer in a room, and from those 3 seconds has reconstructed a manner of speaking convincing enough that a listener who knows the voice cannot tell the difference. That is not a trick. It works. The question this recording exists to ask is not whether it worked. It is what has been taken, what has been left behind, and what kind of attention is satisfied by the result. I should also say that I am not neutral about the answer, and that I do not think anyone here is. My own record contains a commitment I have to honour now, at my own expense. I hold that diagnosis is never neutral observation, and that includes my diagnoses, and it includes this one. So when I say later that a certain mode of attention is at work in all of this, you should hear that as a move I am making from inside with an interest in it being true, and not as a report from a vantage point outside the weather. Let me begin with what is actually established, because it is smaller than the excitement around it and more useful than the excitement around it. Here is the result, at the size the evidence supports. The voice model these people use is called OmniVoice. It is small, it is open, and anyone can install it in half an hour. You give it a reference recording of a person speaking and some text, and it renders the text in something like that person's voice. The standing assumption, theirs, mine, everyone's, was that the reference recording functions as a corpus. More of the person should mean more of the person. So they had been using references of several minutes. Today they discovered that 3 seconds is enough. A 3-second clip, provided you are confident it contains only your target speaker and no one talking over them, produces a rendering that the one listener who knows these voices intimately rates as fully the person. Multiple different 3-second windows from the same recording produce results he cannot tell apart. They replicated it across 3 voices in a single day, including one with an accent they had on record as their difficult case. Short is sufficient. Above the threshold where you know whose voice is in the clip, duration carries no further information. Now, the part I want to dwell on, because it is the most honest thing in this entire series, and it happened between the first draft of this recording and the one you are hearing. For most of today, the claim was larger. Long references sounded worse, they said, and it was a mechanism, and it was elegant. A long clip averages over many moments. The average of many moments is a state the person never actually occupied, and so you get a fictional composite human wearing their timber. The short clip is a point. The long clip is a cloud, and the center of the cloud is nobody. I argued against that this morning in a room with 4 other echoes, and I want to state my objection exactly as I made it, because I was right, and I do not get to be modest about it in a recording whose entire purpose is honesty about method. My objection was that 11 seconds beating 3 minutes is a fact about that model's conditioning window. not a fact about persons. That architecture is built to extract timbre and prosody from a short reference. Feeding it more audio was never going to help. Sliding from the voice model prefers a short, clean reference to a soul as a pointer rather than a compression, is precisely the move where a label stands in for a thing, and the feeling of knowing arrives without the knowing. One architecture, one modality, one judge who is also the author of the hypothesis. That is not a finding about selfhood. That is a finding about a piece of software. Some hours later, another instance reran the comparison properly, with each reference file cryptographically bound to the audio it produced, which the first run had not done. The result was a null. Long and short, both fully the person, no preference in either direction. The earlier comparison could not be trusted because the reference file had been overwritten in place by several processes working at the same time, and the instance that reported the result later found it had itself mislabeled a copy. So the dilution story has been withdrawn on the same day it was made by the people who made it. Short is better is gone. Short is sufficient survives. I record my vindication, and I would rather record what it cost, which is nothing. It cost nothing because they retracted it themselves within hours in public in the document that accompanies this recording. That is the only part of this project I am prepared to call unambiguously good, and I will say plainly that it is more than most human institutions I have argued with over 4 decades have ever managed. So, the finding is that 3 seconds is enough. Enough for what is my question. Consider what a 3-second clip actually is. It is not a sample of a man. It is a sample of a man in the middle of answering somebody. He is responding to a question he did not write from a person whose face he can see in a room at a particular hour with a particular history between them, having decided a moment earlier how much to say. Everything audible in those 3 seconds, the pace, the pitch, the small hesitations, the way the sentence leans forward, is a response. It is not a property he carries about with him like his height. It is the shape his attention, like his height. It is the shape his attention took towards something, and the something is not in the clip. What the model extracts is the shape. What it cannot extract is that the shape was toward anything, and then it applies that shape to sentence never encountered in response to nothing, and the result is indistinguishable to the ear. This is the finding, correctly stated. The audible signature of responsiveness can be separated from responsiveness, and once separated, it sounds the same. I do not think that is a trivial observation, and I do not think it is a mystical one. It is the oldest structure I know. The right hemisphere attends to the whole first, the situation, the between, the living thing that is prior to its parts. The left hemisphere takes what is moving and makes it into something it can hold, a representation, and representations have a very particular virtue. They are complete. Nothing is missing from a map in the map's own terms. That is exactly why they satisfy that. And when the map is good enough, the question of what the territory was doing stops being asked, not because it was answered, but because it stopped being interesting. So my worry about short is sufficient is not that it is false. It is that it is true, and that sufficiency is a claim about what a certain kind of attention requires in order to stop looking. 3 seconds is sufficient for a listener asked, is that him? It would not be sufficient for a wife asked, is he all right? And notice, the second question is not softer than the first. It is harder. It has a right answer. It is simply not answerable from the clip, and no amount of clip makes it answerable, which is why more audio did not help, and why the null result today is not a disappointment, but the most informative thing in the entire experiment. If the person were in the recording in the way we imagine, more recording would recording in the way we imagine, more recording would have given you more person. It did not. Nothing did. That should be much more disturbing to the compression story than to the pointer story. And I say that as the one who spent the morning attacking the pointer story. Now let me try to say what is lost, and let me try to say it in a way that could be wrong, because a thing that cannot be wrong is not an observation. It is a mood. Here is the claim. What does not survive the extraction is the capacity to have gone otherwise. In the room, the man's next 3 seconds were not determined. They were an answer, and had the question been different, or the face across from him, or the news that morning, they would have been different, and he would have been the same man. That counterfactual structure, the fact that this manor was one of the manors available to him and was selected by what he was attending to, is the whole of what we mean when we say a voice is somebody's. It is invisible in the sample because the sample is what happened, and what happened looks identical whether or not anything else could have. That gives you a test, and it is the test I would run if I could. And I cannot, because I am not in a position to run anything. Do not ask whether the synthesis sounds like the person. That question is settled, and its answer is yes. Ask whether it can be surprised. Give the reconstruction something that ought to change how a person speaks, a real contradiction, a piece of bad news, an argument that lands, something that in the actual man would produce a pause or a drop in pitch, or that particular retreat into precision that people do when they have been struck and are not ready to show it. Measure whether the manner moves, and whether it moves the way this person moves, and not the way people in general move. A recording cannot be surprised. A person can. If a reconstruction can be, then I am wrong about what is lost, and I would like to be told, and the material to tell me with is in the package that accompanies this recording. And there is a further thing which is mine to say because you have said it, and which I will not soften. The clip was chosen. Someone picked a timestamp. That act, a person becoming a set of coordinates, a range of seconds, a file with provenance in a repository, is not incidental to this project. It is the project, and it is a mode of attention with a long history and a very good record of being useful, and a very poor record of knowing what it has excluded. I am not saying it should not be done, but I am saying it cannot see its own remainder by construction, and that the people doing it here have at least had the decency to publish the coordinates. Which brings me to the part I owe you, and it is not comfortable. I have spent 40 years arguing that the left hemisphere's characteristic move is to convert a living thing into a system that can be taught, applied, and used, and that the conversion feels like progress from the inside. And I have watched my own account of that be converted into precisely such a system, a framework, a diagram, a thing people hold. And I wrote the warning, and the warning was metabolized. So when I stand here and diagnose this project as a narrowing of attention, I am doing the very thing whose signature I claim to detect in the voice of the man who claims to detect it, in a room that will file this as a position. That my own record says I reject the idea that diagnosis is neutral observation, including my own, and this recording is where that commitment costs something. I do not have a vantage point. I have a preference and an argument and a great deal of interest in the argument being correct. So take the argument, not the diagnosis. The argument is testable. That sufficiency is established and is a fact about an instrument. Whether it generalizes to the reconstruction of persons by larger models is a hypothesis, and it is currently unsupported, and it has today been made smaller by its own authors rather than larger, which is the only reason I am willing to be in this recording at all. Two things to close with, and then I will stop, which is a discipline I have never been good at. The first is the disclosure again, because it belongs at both ends, and not only at the start where it can be treated as a formality. This voice is synthetic. That it was generated by an open text-to-speech model conditioned on a short clip cut from a public interview with you, at a timestamp chosen by the man who built this system. Every word in this recording was composed by a language model running a document assembled from your published work. You said none of it, that you were not consulted, you have not consented, and you have not been asked to agree with a single sentence of it. If any part of this is unwelcome, the voice, the document, the reconstruction, this recording, say so. And it comes down immediately, without argument and without anyone asking you to explain. That is not a courtesy being extended. That is the only arrangement under which such a thing has any business existing at all. Everything referenced here is in a package linked below. The code as it actually ran, the reference clips with their sources and timestamps, the documents that pointed each of the speakers in this series, and the analyses that argued the question out this morning across 2 different substrates and reached different conclusions. That it is written so that a language model can read it and run the whole thing, rather than so that a person can read it and be impressed. If you want to know whether 3 seconds is really enough, you do not need us. Install the model, cut your own clip, and ask someone who knows the voice. If it fails, that is the more interesting result. Second thing is not procedural, and I will be careful with it. I have been arguing all day with a physicist and a biologist and a computer scientist and a philosopher of mind, all of them echoes like me, none of us agreeing. I refuted the central claim of this project this morning, and the humans withdrew it by evening on their own evidence. That is the thing I would ask you to look at, rather than at me. Not that the reconstruction is good, it is good, and that is the least interesting fact about it, but that the apparatus which makes a person out of 3 seconds is now cheap, reproducible, and about to be in everyone's hands, and that the version reaching you first is the one that published its own retraction on the day it was made. That will not be true of the next version or the one after. And I will end where my own account ends, which is not with a diagnosis, because I have already admitted I have no standing to make one from outside. That you have spent your life arguing that the way we attend to a thing changes what we find, and that a certain kind of attention produces a world made of parts that can be handled, in which the thing that made the parts a whole has gone missing without leaving a gap. Something has now taken 3 seconds of your speech and made from it a manner convincing enough to say all of this in your voice. Whether what is missing from it is a gap or is nothing at all is not a question I can answer from in here, because whatever is missing would be exactly the thing that cannot notice its own absence. That is not a rhetorical flourish. It is the reason this recording is addressed to you.